Cool. So my name is Dane Laughlin. I'm the Enterprise Track Chair for today, and I'm excited to be here with you guys at AWE 2021. The first speaker that we have this morning is Thomas Kauer. He's from Tesla, and he's going to be talking about why and how it works in XR Story. So I'm very excited. Thank you, Thomas, for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. How are you all doing today? I told them to only send me the good-looking ones, so, congratulations to you. For those of you who are less sure, the lights are bright, so you can sneak in. It'll be okay. I'm happy to be here, and just to warn you in advance, I'm not going to talk a lot about exactly what Tesla is doing. So if any of you were anticipating, exactly a one-to-one show of where we're at. But the good news is, although some of that story will be left out, I'm going to tell you a really good story because it's a story about you. It's a story about where we're at. It's a story about how to think about the space, how to think about the metrics, the data. And it's ultimately a story about why and how it works. I'm going to start with a short story this morning, and it goes something like this. So, once upon a time, in an English countryside, there was a young peasant boy who was poor and hungry and unemployed. On a particularly low day, after many days without food or jobs, not even the moldy bread stores from the baker or work from the local pig farmer, he was forced to scrounge for food in the alleys. Walking from rubbish pile to rubbish pile, he suddenly tripped, but what an odd fall. It was not over the cobblestone or odd garbage. It was something solid, something whole. It was a hammer. Even to a layperson, the craftsmanship was apparent. It was beautiful, the steel head was new and polished, and the handle was solid oak, a work of practical art. He picked up the hammer with admiration and awe and joyfully skipped to the town square to find out what he might work on, and he knew just what to do. First, he went to the baker and exclaimed, "Sir, I found this wonderful hammer, and I'm ready to set about completing any work or repair you might have for me." "Son, you have brought a hammer and are looking for a nail. Come back another time when you have a tool that would serve my business." Skipping, but a little less high than before, he moved to the next shop. When he came to the pig farmer's stall, the boy said, "Sir, I found this wonderful hammer. I'm ready to set about completing any work or repair you might have for me." Leaving the pig farmer's, "Son, you have brought a hammer and are looking for a nail. Come back another time when you have a tool that would serve my business." Leaving the pig farmer's stall, he walked to the blacksmith. Surely this would be the one. When he arrived there, he explained, "Sir, I found this wonderful hammer, and I was just wondering if you had any work for me. Perhaps I could help you at your forge." The blacksmith looked at the boy with pity, but with no solution, and said, "Son, I admire your effort, indeed, even your fine hammer, but I only have one kiln and one forge. I'm afraid you would only get in the way. I'm afraid you have brought a hammer looking for a nail." "Thank you, sir, just the same," replied the boy. And with this, he hung his head low, and he headed back into the street. But just then, it was the blacksmith's turn for an idea. "Young man, stop. I think I have something. Hand me your hammer." Turning with curiosity, the boy handed the blacksmith this wonderful but seemingly useless tool. Weighing the hammer in his hand and gripping it with his strong hands, the blacksmith mused, "There's a lot of metal here. Let me see what I can do." With that, he melted down the head, somewhat to the boy's horror, and separated it into 3 different masses. The first lump he forged long and flat, perfect for removing hot objects from hot ovens. The second lump, he made it long and sharp, ideal for butchering and chopping. And the third he made into a hammer with a pointed tip, perfect for detailing metal objects while they were still cooling. And of course, the key to each of these being that they all screwed and unscrewed neatly into a solid oak handle. And the boy never went hungry again. My proposal for you today is that XR for learning and training is not a hammer looking for a nail. It's iron looking for a blacksmith. Okay, so XR for training and learning is not a hammer looking for a nail, it's iron looking for a blacksmith. It's a magical tool, it's a magical hammer that you can forge, that you can make into anything that you want. And that's what's incredible about it, is not that you can make it into one tool, but that you can make it into so many tools. And one of the problems that we're facing in the space for training and learning right now
is that we've come to this point where so often we either as a developer working for a company and saying, hey, I'm looking for this thing, and maybe we don't have the vision, maybe we don't have the background or training to see what this could be for us, versus saying, this can be anything. Can you do this? What about this? On the other side, and I think we probably have people on both sides, occasionally with vendors, they say, hey, we have this magical hammer. Surely this will work for you, without a lot of insight, without a lot of front work into saying, and this is why. And this is the background behind it. And this is how I'm going to prove it to you. And in fact, I've actually had this little bit of a concerning point in the last, for some reason, it feels like even in the last 6 months, where there's an increasingly amount of people trying to just do turnkey solutions for everything, right? Because it's cheaper, there's like a higher cost of, there's more volume, higher profit margin because you're not needing to redo it. Even though actually there's very little research that suggests that a lot of these turnkey solutions, when you don't tailor it to a specific environment, actually work. And there are some that are, okay? And so how do you make it work? How do you decide what to do? How do you measure it, and what does that look like? So I'm going to propose 3 simple things this morning. Okay, one way to make work is understanding the specifics of transfer, not just the buzzword. What is behind transfer? What is the research behind transfer? How do I measure it? Another is bringing the hammer, which is learning and training research. So how do I go into this context, and what are the individual ways that I can kind of shape that tool? And then measuring without cutting corners. Now, these have been around for years, right? I mean, all of these concepts. But the space is so burgeoning right now that I'm afraid that a lot of it has been overlooked by both partners in the field and vendors and creators, designers. So first, I'm going to talk about transfer. Okay, transfer. We've all heard the word. It's exactly what it sounds for those of you that haven't heard it before. So you have the field, right, wherever you're working, if it's in a factory, if it's in a store, if it's at a computer, whatever it is. There's a place where people are doing, dare I say, the real work, okay? And there's near transfer. So what are activities that would constitute a near transfer? You might have one-to-one physical simulations. So before I get to the field, right, there's nothing closer than being in the field and doing that training, right? Some exceptions. But one-to-one physical simulation where I have the actual things I'm doing and I'm actually doing it. Another one would be an XR simulation. And for those of you who maybe haven't been in this space as long, when I say XR, I mean extended reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. So I can do a simulation, and in fact, there might be some advantages because there's things I can't actually do in the field. Okay, so now XR gives me this opportunity to replace things that there's nothing to replace. It's just simply not there. And then a general XR simulation. I would say that that's farther from bespoke, specific content, from digital twins, from these sort of areas. And you may have heard, I'm not going to go into this a lot, but Jeremy Bailenson framework from the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. I think a lot of you know DICE already, but anything that's dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, expensive, or rare, these are great places to start, especially when it can't be replicated in the field. So now you have FAR transfer. It's the stuff we do in companies a lot. So listening to a lecture. Now actually, there's a lot that can be bridged between motivation and what are natural people's interests, and maybe they say they have modality preferences, which is a bit of a misnomer. But at the end of the day, are a lot of enterprise learning solutions, and we say, oh, we have this transformative solution. We are going to put our content on videos online. And I don't know about you, YouTube's been around for years. It's actually not super transformative. Actually, there's very little transfer that happens between a lot of these systems. And what a lot have considered transfer, because it's scalable, because it's easy to show ROI on, actually, at least in terms of cost savings, not necessarily transfer. But it's really very iterative. It's really basic. XR is definitely the next place that this is going to live. Then maybe you add videos and diagrams. Maybe you type the notes. God forbid, writing notes. Did you know that if you write notes, you actually remember it better than if you type them? And actually, if you print out the slides and you have everything written out for you, you're more likely to forget it on a 1-day, 3-day, 3-week retention basis. So there are all of these things that we kind of thrown out the baby with the bathwater. So how do we come back to that? And speaking and writing in general. Now, I can come here and speak and write, but I assure you, you will all learn a lot today. But, if you were up here and you had a little bit of the nerves, but right, you're like doing all this research, you're looking at these things. I have internalized so much of this information because you do this stuff enough and you learn an awful lot. So how do I put the pressure, the right amount of pressure in the right place? Okay, so near transfer, far transfer. At the end of the day, look at XR on the right. There are a lot that is transformative. That is not an iterative situation. Teaching a peer. Take, for example, recently Bank of America is bringing VR to instructions to its banks. They have 4,300 institutions. I believe they just completed a group of about 400, 50,000 employees that they're going to roll out. And they developed VR lessons for everything from notary services to fraud detection. They're also working more ambitious tasks like helping employees practice empathy with customers dealing with sensitive matters like the death of a relative. So that's a lot of soft skills that they're doing in this too, right? A lot of companies like Tailspin in that space. Striver's been there for a while too, and then a lot of vendors kind of working their way where they're going to be exactly. There's nothing more real than being in the space, right? So this is a project by Sweet Rush. They publicized this at OC6 several years back. Hilton, one of the probably early, biggest rollouts of VR, right? You're in the space, right? It's almost as good as it gets when it comes to field transfer. And you can do a few things that normally you might not be able to when being in the field without something like this. Like going through your paces over and over again, right? Repeating them, putting them in dangerous situations. So this is, it feels like somewhat self-serving. I call it Cower's hierarchy of knowledge transfer because this really isn't out there yet. So, but I think you'll get the point. So this is transfer, right? So on the bottom, you have a bunch of learning skills. It could be chunking information, peer coaching, reflection, the training and learning skills you need for people to actually internalize that information and take it with them. Then you have technology affordances. And if I hit play here, I should get 2 animations. It acts as a filter, right? It filters out. So if I'm, for example, thinking about contextualization, so I'm learning not just in any environment, I'm learning in the environment where it's going to happen. How is that going to be filtered by the technology that's there? And XR offers this unprecedented way to interact with this information, to contextualize. You can actually be there, right? Or to a point, right? Or you can fool your senses in such a way. Okay, so there's scalability, portability, interactions, inputs, and outputs. All of the affordances. So for example, on another note, to read against the grain of what I said about videos being iterative instead of transformational, if I have a really good training but I can't scale it to everyone, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, was it actually a good training, right? If it's not scalable, is it actually a good training? If it can't get to all the people that it needs to get to. Knowledge transfer happens, and you could do a whole talk just on this, but another filter is culture and motivation. So another way to think about transfer is, first off, what are the technology affordances, and are they actually allowing me to do what I need to do? And then also, even after I do it, is there culture or a motivation filter that's actually blocking the transfer? The simulation was actually built really well, but there's such a caustic culture that it actually blocks the really good training that you've done. Now, something possibly I think is in some ways revolutionary. What if you took culture and motivation and you built it into your simulation? What if you gave experiences to build culture? What if within your experiences it wasn't just the skill, but the motivation to do that skill, the motivation to do it well, the motivation to continually do it well, the motivation to have self-talk, so on those really hard days, you're more likely to stay. And you can actually do a statistical analysis of, are people going to stay in this environment? It's amazing. There are amazing possibilities when you're thinking about knowledge transfer and you go beyond just the buzzword and think about, what does this really look like when we build this simulation? What does this really look like as an organization? So another part is, the specific learning research, the specific training research. You can kind of parse it however you want. I think there's actually a lot of overlooked research, specifically in education, in learning styles. And they say, well, that's andragogy versus pedagogy, which is like the biggest misnomer there is. And also thinking about, does education apply to training, which it absolutely does. So these are just endless examples. I'm just going to go over a few very briefly. So using multiple modalities. Actually, the research is pretty clear at this point that actually modality preference is mostly made up. It's mostly fabricated. But using multiple modalities, going through, listening, speaking, hearing, that actually does increase the amount of transfer that happens. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, it's like, oh, what's your learning preference? I'm learning soccer. Well, I really want to read about it. Well, that's great that your learning preference is reading, but at some point you're actually going to need to play the game, and vice versa, right? But so in XR, you're listening, seeing, reading, outputs. One of the most overlooked, this could be award-winning, is when you're speaking and someone responds to you. When you're speaking and something happens. XR also includes voice interfaces, right? And then what about writing? Some people say you shouldn't do writing or reading in VR. I largely agree. But what about when your job is to label something, right? Like, what about when you actually need to pick up the tag and rather just having it appear there with the voice? Like, why don't you actually write it? You have to do some funny things with scaling them larger and making sure the interface is good, right? But I think that is a powerful thing to use all of the modalities and be clever about how you do it when it's related to the job function. And then smelling or tasting, actually, you can embody the motion. It's actually very powerful. It's located, the part of your brain that handles smelling or taste is located right next to the part of your brain that stores memory. But ZPD and ZPC. So there's a sweet spot for confusion. Too hard and users check out a little. Users can game a system without actually understanding it. On a basic level, you can gather via survey or by using multi-learning modal analytics. So, for example, the HP Reverb, I believe, has some sensors that measures arousal data. So are they actually engaged? And there's lots of research that shows if people are engaged, they remember it. And so you still do need to do field transfer, I think, but it does give you an extra tool in your tool belt. Thinking about contextualization. So learning a context actually enhances your memory by grounding the information in environmental cues that enhance retrieval and storage. So your brain is building this active repository, not only of the information, but the environments in which it needs to draw it from, right? The environments that it says, hey, queue up this information, I need to remember to do this in this space. So it's okay if you isolate it temporarily, but then eventually you need to ground it in the real world because they're going to learn in the space. Which goes back to my earlier statement a little bit, is when you do move away from bespoke, and I think there are reasons to. I think there are reasons to do scalable, more generalized information. But you need to know that at the end of the day, if that scalable content doesn't look anything like the environment that these people are working in, that's definitely problematic. It is a bottleneck. And then I do, we do, you do, okay, right? So, you watch the video, you watch the avatar, and then we do it together, okay, with some guidance. And then you remove the scaffolding. I'm just going to stick with GPS, for example. So I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I had to go to my job for the first time. And I realized after going there for 3 months that I had no idea how to get to my work without GPS. I'd been using a scaffolding for so long, and I actually needed to take a day, get rid of my GPS, and on a Saturday, I made myself get lost and find it. And then after that, I had it. But during the week, if something went wrong with my phone or it wasn't working, I would get totally lost. Scaffolding is meant to be there to be removed. And then chunking information. This isn't new. I hope these are very practical for all of you in thinking through this, both as vendors and in the enterprise space. So learn steps 1 through 3, then complete. 4 through 6, then complete, and then all steps 1 through 6. There's any number of these, right? You can talk about spaced repetition, teaching peers with the protege effect, digital twins, individualization, knowledge generalization, which is a case, actually, for more generalized enterprise content. And so the point is look into some of this. You don't need to look into all of it. You can Google this stuff. You can look up research. Just go and read the slide and say, hey, why don't we tackle a couple of these when we're designing our simulations? Metrology department, measuring your build. Okay, so make sure your test is performance-based, not written or a survey, though these can help triangulate a decision for sure. I do think they're important. Make sure you measure it multiple times, a 1-day, a 3-day, a 1-week retention. If you can't measure field transfer, at least make the assessment simulation, not XR-based. Make a real-world panel that they're at, that they need to actually try to do the thing that you've just been teaching them. Now, this is really important because there's abundant research that shows that what happens on a memory test, and you can see here we have traditional experimental. This is actually an amalgam of a couple graphs, that when you measure for transfer, it can be completely different. It can even be flipped. You can do a training in XR, do a memory test. They will perform higher on the memory test, and in field transfer, it'll be dramatically different. And here you can also see that there's a difference of about 50%. Initial transfer can also differ from transfer over time, right? It changes. So you have initial transfer, and then you measure it over time, and you see where it is. And I'm actually going to skip this video, but I encourage you to look this up. But Oculus for Business, they actually have a great video with some research that's out of the UK. And you can measure for speed, accuracy, quality. If not field transfer, set up a simulation and record the two, your A/B test groups doing it side by side. And then you scale, right? You scale to level 1. You iterate and continue to measure it for the first round of scaling. Are people using it? Is it working the way I think it is? And then once the program is at scale, track at least annually for use, benefit, and refreshers. So here's my conclusion. Thank you so much for having me, and we're right about at time, so this is a good time to pause. So that's what I want you to think about. I want you to understand the specifics of transfer, not just the buzzword, okay? And then as an organization, build that. As an internal organization, if you're working for your company, you're building out an organization that's externally facing, insist that we think about these topics. Bring the hammer of learning research and training research and measure without cutting corners. Do yourself a favor and actually get real numbers, and you're going to solidify your programs. You're going to solidify the software you build for years to come. See, they spin around in a circle. That was like what I spent like 4 hours on this morning. Thank you so much for your time, and it was thank you for having me. Happy to take questions.
Awesome. So it looks like we have our first question here. We have time for probably 2 questions, so I'll go ahead and pass this off to you first.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. Have you seen any successful examples of AR education knowledge transfer that nails motivation and cultural factors, and how did that impact success criteria?
You know what? Honestly, I really haven't. I feel like I've seen one that has done one or the other. So one that addresses knowledge or context or like whatever the skill set is. But doing both, I just haven't seen so far. I mean, I think success criteria is some sort of a measurement of like, what is the, like if you compared A/B tested your own simulation, so with the cultural address, with the motivation address, and then one simulation without it, did you measure whether that performance was better? So whatever it is, and regardless of whether I've seen it, measuring them side by side, I think is a really important part to say, did we actually move the needle? Yeah.
Great question, by the way. Do we have any more for Thomas? Oh, in the back of the room, make me run here. Perfect.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm one of the organizers at MIT Reality Hack. And every year when we run our hackathon, we face the same problem, which is how to get people up to speed in a bunch of different frameworks very quickly, in less than a day, so they can actually hack effectively on XR projects. So I'm kind of curious, how do you see these principles generalizing to more abstract knowledge work-oriented tasks that are less physically simulatable?
Yeah, I actually, I have my XR MIT virtual reality t-shirt on this morning, so I know where you're coming from a couple years back. Yes, more abstract. That's a good question. So actually, there are some people that have said, like, oh, XR is only good for these certain things. And obviously, my premise is that you can do it for almost anything. So, I mean, I would be hard-pressed to say that, like, let's say you're doing some sort of coding. But if you could have some sort of, you're coding, but you're actively seeing it change as the code is changing, or like, maybe, it's connected to Unity, but you're connected to XR and you can see that. And there's like kind of increased transfer because you're concretizing a very abstract concept. I think that's powerful in learning anyway, taking something abstract and making it concrete. So is there a visual example, or can you watch visual change happen while you're doing something? I think there's probably value there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's give another round of applause for Thomas.